And I immediately was like, oh, he's taking it away to put a microphone in and he's going to catch him for everything. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jackson. That's Jacob. We're coming to you not live, but recorded. And we are kind of in the midst of the season here. Excited to continue to engage in conversation around this script today. Today we're talking about Two Sisters and a Piano by Nilo Cruz, and excited to return to Cruz on the show.
That's right. We last talked about Nilo Cruz in season 6, which is like more than half the life of the podcast ago. And we talked about Cruz's play, Anna in the Tropics, a Pulitzer Prize winning play, a beautiful, amazing play about cigar rollers, about storytelling, about the power of in that case, they were telling aloud the story of a novel, a famous Russian novel. And it is interesting. This is only our second Nilo Cruz play on the podcast, but a similar kind of power of telling a story being like one of the key actions of the play, a character telling stories to another character.
Yeah, the telling of stories, the kind of evoking. A lot of this play is saying one thing and it's talking about another thing. And that is some to do with the given circumstances, some to do with using narrative as a way to, a narrative within narrative as a way to guide the narrative. So it's a cool play for that kind of double layered nature of storytelling, of having the story being told and sussed out by the audience, but also the characters because they're trying to figure out a story being told.
Yeah, and of course this play also a political play about life under communism in Cuba. Nilo Cruz is easily the most famous, most popular Cuban-American playwright in the country. Born in Cuba, raised in Miami, as those who've listened to our Anna in the Tropics episode, or just folks that know Nilo Cruz know. And his sort of presence as a Miami not birthed because he was born in Cuba, Miami produced playwright. Miami really still claims him. And when we get to the context section, we'll talk about this play and many of his other plays having been done in Miami many times, even as now he's a professor of playwriting at very prestigious universities and gets a lot of stuff in New York and is a very popular working commercial playwright. He really does still, it seems, claim Miami and the city claims him. And I think that relationship, it's interesting actually because last week we talked about Pearl Clegg and her relationship with Atlanta, right? And so playwrights that aren't just, and Nilo Cruz now is very associated with New York City, but it's not just that playwrights have these New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, that's where the playwrights are. There are these great working American playwrights that are really from and of and claim other communities in the country.
Yeah, kind of naming and claiming those other city centers, and especially because so many city centers still do have such vibrant art scenes, it's cool to get the chance to have playwrights who kind of bring a bit of those scenes to the plays that they write as well.
Yeah, and this play I think it's about. This play is actually set in Cuba. I mean, I think that's different than Anna in the Tropics, which was set in Florida. And this play is set in the middle of this communist regime in Florida. It's a very different political situation, and the play certainly is some about that political situation. And it's had more productions lately than it has in this is a play from 1999. I'm stealing a little bit from later, but it's now 26 years old. But it's had some life recently, and I mean, without this podcast getting too political, certainly there are some political let's call them relationships between the context of this play and other political situations happening.
Yeah, for sure. This steals a little bit from the conversation ahead as well, but the way that this play deals with the kind of isolationism and both from a national perspective, but then also on a personal level. It ties into some of our, kind of shared COVID feelings of the last couple of years. So there's some access to those emotions as well in this play. So it really does kind of strike on a lot of the undercurrents that are being felt right now. Even though it's a play that's been around for a little while. It's been around for as you said, 20 some years already, and it's about 1991. So yeah, it's a cool play for how much it is referencing a lot of the undercurrents that we're experiencing in the circle again.
No, I think that you're bringing in like the COVID isolation feelings is really interesting because, of course, the story of the play is about two sisters like literally under house arrest,
Yeah.
trapped in their house in Cuba, and there was a great recorded production that was filmed that I'll talk about right after the COVID pandemic, and I have to imagine that there's a direct tie there about the reason why that play was created in a digital way in the way that plays were being done before that moment because of the house arrest, right? People compared COVID to feeling like they were under house arrest, to being trapped in your home for sustained long periods of time. And so, I mean, it certainly speaks into that, sort of specific lived experience. It sounds like we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to get to. Before we do, I do want to invite everybody listening to head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's all one word, no hyphens, no underscores. Patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. That's where you can become a supporter of the show. To our supporters over there, huge thank you. You make doing this podcast possible. We'd love to do it. We get to talk about beautiful plays like this that where we live, neither of us have a ton of access to see a play like this necessarily. So reading it, talking about it, I know that that's the case for a lot of you out there. Great way to engage with a much wider theater landscape than may be available in your community. And we wouldn't get to do that if not for the supporters like you. We love it. It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege to talk about two sisters and a piano today, but it wouldn't really be possible in the way that we do No Script without the financial support of our patrons. So if that's you, again, huge thank you. If not, go check it out. There's how Patreon works, there's different tiers and different rewards. The lowest tier has been since we started and will continue to be $1 a month, $12 over the course of the year. Even that is so hugely valuable to us. Please, please, please think about it. We will see you over there, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. And now back to the script.
Here we go.
Okay, so this play, as I understand its kind of origin stories, came to Cruz, the concept or the rough idea for this sort of house arrest portrait, came to Cruz from actually reading about the real experience of a Cuban writer and revolutionary in Cuba after Russia has pulled, this is set in a period just after Russia's sort of pulled out of Cuba, or really the USSR at that point, going through their own major turmoil and upheaval around the communist revolution, perestroika, all the things that were going on. They've pulled out of Cuba, and apparently in real life there was a writer. This is not a story that I know. I'm speaking just from the little bit of looking I've done. Maria Elena Cruz Varela, who was part of a collective of artists that sent Fidel Castro essentially a manifesto, although that might be a little strong, essentially a letter asking him to embrace the same sort of, not necessarily breakup of the revolution, but changes to the revolution that were taking place in the Soviet Union. And this particular writer, so the story goes, was forced to eat the manifesto, actually eat the pages of the manifesto in front of a crowd that was protesting outside of her house. Now that is interesting because that is a threat that one of the characters levels against another character in this play, and it's unclear to me in the world of this play whether this real event has actually happened and he's like the character is referencing this real event, or if Cruz is sort of building a world in which this character in this play might become that character in real life. Not totally clear on that, but this very kind of tangible image of being forced to eat the pages of your manifesto, under threat of mob assault essentially. So Varela was sentenced to time in prison, just like Jackson will tell you about the character in this play, and then placed under house arrest during the Pan American Games, largely so that she couldn't like leave the country and go sort of anti-Cuban government publicity tour, essentially around the world. So, obviously, a lot of that is very, very close to the events of this play, as Jackson will describe. But so that is what I understand to be the inspiration for Cruz in coming up with this portrait. Received a commission from the McCarter Theater Center and did several readings, workshops, worked there at the McCarter Theater Center, at the New York Theater Workshop Lab, at South Coast Rep, at the Public Theater, at Sundance Theater Lab, working with a really, really great dramaturg. Back and forth, they developing this script, Two Sisters and a Piano, until eventually it gets its world premiere on the McCarter main stage. At that time, Emily Mann is the artistic director of McCarter. Emily Mann, of course, fabulous playwright in her own right, and speaks very highly of the project to develop this and another play that they had gotten funding for. But what's cool about that 1999 production, you can actually, I believe it's the lighting designer who has the production photos for that production on their personal website, like their professional sort of portfolio website. So if you Google around a little bit, you should be able to find the production photos. And I got to tell you, among the most fabulous production photos I've ever seen in my life. I mean, just a stunning production, unbelievably gorgeous, incredible. I mean, I can't speak highly. This is having not seen it, and just looking at the pictures, it's like, holy smokes, that's amazing. So world premiere there. Then it was at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta in 99 at South Coast Rep. In 2000, it gets its sort of New York off-Broadway run at the Public Theater with Daphne Rubin Vega as one of the central characters. That, of course, she's famous for being the original Mimi in Rent. And she will come back later in this context section. 2003, it goes across the seas to Out of the Box Productions in the UK. Then it's back at the Old Globe's Cassius Carter Center stage in San Diego here in 04. 08, the first of the Miami productions at the Promethean Theater. 13, it's at Teatro Paraguay in Santa Fe. And 16 at the San Pedro Playhouse in San Antonio. And then, so this is now we get to the pandemic era, and then this post-pandemic production created by New Normal Rep is a streaming production. It seems to be, from the photos and reviews that I've read, sort of an elevated Zoom performance. Like, they're able to have consistent backgrounds in a way that I think is interesting. It's hard for me to tell whether the actors are actually physically in the same place or in separate places, but the technology is just working really well because the backgrounds seem fairly seamless between the shots, but it still is like a torso to head shot that they're performing. It's like something between a radio play and a staged reading and a full production with some design. And interestingly, that was directed by Nilo Cruz, and that's going to be sort of a consistent thing here for a moment. That cast included, again, Daphne Rubin Vega and the amazing, incredible Jimmy Smits, who, if you Google him, you'll recognize him right away. And he was also in Anna in the Tropics recently before that as well, and won some awards for his performance in that play. In June 2023, it goes to the new Two River Theater in New Jersey. It's revived there with, again, Nilo Cruz directing. A lot of great online marketing types of materials around the play. If you're interested, interviews with the cast, trailers, stuff like that. That was a fairly big production. And then in just last year, in early 2024, it goes down and plays at Miami New Drama. So again, a Miami production. This time, Nilo Cruz is again directing, but he writes a new monologue for the play, for the piano tuner character. And unfortunately, in our copy of the script is the published acting edition from 04, which does not seem to be updated with that new piano tuner monologue, which I'd be very, very interested to get my hands on, because that's, of the four characters, that's the one I remain the most curious about, because we know the least about that particular character. So totally understand the idea that as he's remounting it in Miami in 2024, he wants to add some material for the piano tuner. We'll be really interested to see what that's like. There's a great video on YouTube that is apparently the Miami New Drama Theater has educational matinees of their shows for schools, and they produce a bunch of material which is a fairly common thing. But there's a great video that has some awesome interviews with the cast, talks about the playwright, the context for the work and stuff. If you just want sort of an overview, that Miami new drama video, a really great info. So a couple of pretty, good sized productions here just in the past couple of years, which, as we've said earlier, maybe come out of the pandemic isolation, maybe come out of some of the more political turmoil that we're experiencing in America. But the play from '99 about a communist regime in the early '90s had come back with a relevance.
Yeah. So excited to have the conversation about it today and to kind of join the ongoing conversation. As Jacob said, there's plenty of sources for you to kind of continue the conversation after this. Definitely check them out. We'll be approaching it from our particular cultural perspective and our own position as play analyzers. So definitely check out some more of the conversation around this play. As we are jumping into that conversation, I'm just going to give us a very brief summary of this play. And I think I'll just say up front, there's so many pieces woven into this play that I'm going to leave a lot of them out. And we're going to kind of cruise along at a high altitude, give us a brief summary just so we can get started and pull out some of those really intricate themes that are woven throughout this play. This play centers in Cuba. It's in a spacious colonial house, and you can, as Jacob said, check out some pictures around that and how stages have produced that. And the time is 1991. Pretty particular time. Gorbachev is president over in Russia. There's lots of things on the global stage being sussed out, and the fate of Cuba is being decided as a result of a lot of those things. And the characters that we meet are Maria Celia and Sofia. Maria Celia is a writer who has kind of previous to this play, both she and her sister Sofia have been imprisoned in prison, and they're currently imprisoned under house arrest in their home. Other characters that we'll meet are Lieutenant Portuando, who I'll refer to as the lieutenant from now on, and then there's a militia who briefly shows up, and then there's Victor Manuel as well, who is the piano tuner. We'll get to all of them in just a minute. The play opens up with this sort of inspection that's happening. Maria, Celia, and Sofia are kind of regularly have their house inspected because they're suspicious that she is still writing. She wrote this manifesto with a bunch of her friends that she got thrown in prison for, and she's under house arrest. Her husband Antonio is out in the world, kind of doing the kind of world tour about Cuba that Jacob sort of previously described in the context, and they know that he's trying to get her out of the country somehow. So they're regularly checking her kind of premises for more writing to see if she's still a revolutionary in some way, or against, or doing her own brand of revolutionary, and trying to figure out if she's writing or not. What quickly becomes apparent is the lieutenant has a bit of a fascination with Maria Celia. There is this sort of fascination with her writing, but then also a more sexual fascination with her as well, that pretty quickly comes to light. And the already oppression of their state of being prisoners in the house becomes amplified by the lieutenant's attention to Maria Celia. Maria Celia and Sofia are continuously kind of talking back and forth around the state of things. And one of the things that they talk around is the piano, which is going to be pretty important for the play. They have the kind of last piece of entertainment that is left to them. Their radio isn't working, but the piano is still there. And so they talk about music and they talk about the piano, and they finally decide to get it tuned because it's been a long time since it was tuned. And so they do everything they need to kind of get the permits and get everything associated with that to get a piano tuner over. And we meet the piano tuner, Victor Manuel, who comes over, tunes the piano. There's some good conversation that we might get to eventually around music choice and the use of music as a beautiful thing that can prompt people towards goodness, but also how that is something that in an isolationist society is often tamped down on. Into that conversation, the lieutenant shows back up again, and he comes up with this idea. He knows that Maria Celia is writing this other story of some sort, had written another story, but she says that she threw it away. She destroyed it. And he wants to hear it. He wants to know what the story is, and whether we believe that he's trying to suss out some information from her, or whether he's fascinated with her writing and the story. He wants to hear it, and he says that he'll read her the letters of her husband in exchange for her telling him the story. What precedes is kind of a cat and mouse game of that. He comes over a number of times, continues to kind of say that he'll read the letters, eventually starts to read the letters, but starts to insert some of his own like love language towards Maria Celia into the letters that her husband writes her. But he does read enough of the letters that she starts to like get her husband Antonio's secret code and starts to learn more about the world outside.
Which I think is a, correct me if you think I'm wrong, Jackson, and this is more clear, that is an interpretation of what happens. It's not so clearly spelled out that he's inserting his own lines into these letters, but I have that in my notes of things I'm interested in talking about, that is also my reading of what's going on. That at some point he's not anymore reading from the letter that her husband wrote. He's now pretending to read from the letter. And then my next question that follows that is whether she knows that, and like when she figures that out, and how that contributes to what's coming.
Yeah, I think that second question is a really interesting one for our further conversation. I think there's one moment where the quotes do end, and
yes,
and you
like
see
how it appears in the script, the actual like, punctuation. Yes.
Yep. So from the script analysis perspective, there is a moment where he stops reading it and inserts his own. But I think it's really subjective to figure out whether the characters know or not, or whether even the audience necessarily knows or not, because he just starts looking up and not reading anymore. So there's some interesting conversation that I'm sure we'll have more on there. To briefly sum up the rest of the play, though, the situation continues along eventually by virtue of kind of the full court press and also some of Maria Celia's like kind of wondering how to get out of this scenario and gradual building of trust between the lieutenant and Maria Celia. He claims that he is his own brand of revolutionary, just one that's very embedded in the oppressor. And so there's kind of developing a relationship with them. Eventually it becomes a physical relationship. They sleep together, which kind of sends Sophia off of not a cliff necessarily, but she like makes the move to leave the house. She dresses up in their father's clothes and decides to get out of the house for the night. Unfortunately, both the lieutenant and Maria Celia find out about this, and consequences do occur. The lieutenant blows up out of proportional to at least the facade that he is giving of he's kind of on their side. He says that they're going to get in trouble for it. And eventually like storms out of the place. They have their own arguments. Sophia blames Maria Celia somewhat for their current state because of the thing that she wrote, etc. And they have this, but she also like rightly notes that like she's not safe here because of the way Maria Celia has been behaving with the lieutenant. So there's kind of the continued tension building there. All along the way, an important subplot of all this is that Victor Manuel and Sophia have this kind of spark of relationship when he's over tuning the piano, and for whatever reason she invites him over to supper on a future night. For whatever reason he doesn't show up. And we're kind of left to wonder what those reasons are, and not really sure exactly what exactly happened to him. But that is kind of an important subplot, especially for Sophia. Eventually the wheels come kind of completely off the carriage. The lieutenant shows his true hand, that he is just kind of keeping them in an isolationist area out of this sort of like fetishizing of the writing and of Maria Celia, and certainly from the governmental perspective of like trying to keep them locked away so that she doesn't continue to be a revolutionary or tell the story out in the world. And eventually it all comes to a head. He kind of takes away his quote-unquote protection, at one point he takes away the radio, then the end of the play he takes away the piano, and they're kind of left in the house as a result of that relationship derailing and his kind of true colors showing through. All along the ways, Maria Celia is getting these little bits of the letters from her husband Antonio out in the world. So the play kind of ends with the knowledge that he's out there in the world trying to bring some way out for them, but that it's not going to end up coming anytime soon.
Yeah, so I mean, from the very beginning of the play, in these letters that Maria's writing, and in the responses that we hear from him and her interpretation of the code that's being sent through the letters, like the thing that supposedly her husband is out in the world trying to get from all these foreign governments is amnesty for political prisoners. That Maria and her sister are considered political prisoners, and that there might be able to be some like global international pressure not to hold and keep political prisoners, to allow them essentially to leave the country, certainly to leave house arrest. Now, what's interesting is that there's a point in the middle where the lieutenant sort of asks, even if you weren't under house arrest, would you really want to leave Cuba? And she's not sure about that. She says something to the effect of, I didn't ever think exile was the plan. And so it's a little unclear whether she even quite knows what would happen if this were actually achieved. But it is that the phrase from the very beginning of the play, amnesty for political prisoners, is sort of what their hope is rooted in, their hope of getting out of this situation.
And the hope of getting out to hear, even to hear news of what's going on in the outside world, trying to just get out of this immediate imprisonment in this situation, which again at the end they're even more Spartan. All their stuff has been sort of taken away, and they're kind of left in the home without music, with just Maria Celia and Sophia in the home. The last little piece that I'll give us, which is the epilogue scene, and there's an important underlying plot point to it all, is they have this next door neighbor that Sophia is kind of listening for all the time. She knows he's out there. She's heard him talk about them and wanting to be with them in some way through the wall, but they also hear the music through the wall as well. And in this last kind of beat of the play, Sophia says that she hears him through the wall, and it's a little unclear, again, kind of subjective, exactly to what state everyone is in this moment, given all the oppression and the trauma. But she hears the music through the wall, and it's the similar music to what she was talking about with Victor Manuel early on in the play. And she and Maria Celia kind of listen through the wall as this music swells from the next door neighbor, and the outside world continues to be the outside world to them. And the music kind of swells as the play ends.
Yeah, I like that, highlighting that, because I think it's I don't know about major, but it's a really beautiful kind of tracking through the play. Of course, in the epilogue, the other thing that's going on is they're now on a hunger strike. They've sort of instituted a hunger strike as the next way to exert some pressure on the Cuban government. And so I think it's certainly worth asking the question, like, what kind of state are they in? And, how real is this? It doesn't seem to indicate that we, the audience, can really hear the music. It seems like it's just them, although I suppose that, by production, maybe you would answer that question in certain ways. But it's definitely a payoff of that. And it's not the first scene in the play, because the first scene in the play is when the house gets sort of violently searched by the lieutenant and another soldier. But after that Maria and Sophia are talking about listening for the guy in the next room. This is the very beginning of the play, very beginning of their house arrest. They're listening for this guy, and Sophia says that he is their neighbor sits out and listens to her play the piano. She says he sat by the doorway with a drink in his hand. He smoked and drank and listened to me for more than an hour. Music is like medicine. I touched his soul. And so this scene at the very end, where they are, if we just assume that it is actually happening to them, listening to him play the music, is she says that he's playing the same music that she used to play all the time. She says, I used to play that song on the piano. You remember? He's playing that song in his house. What should I do, Maria Celia? What should I do? And the sister says, just listen, Sophia. Be still and listen. Just listen to the music. They're listening to the music as the lieutenant is pounding on the door to get in. And so, one way to look at stories, of course, is to track how things change from beginning to end. So from the beginning of the play, when they have the piano and they're creating the music that the neighbor is listening to while having to pretend not to listen to. And then at the end, they no longer have the piano, and the neighbor, a reading of it at least would be, the neighbor knows they've lost their piano and is playing the music that she used to play for their benefit, while having to pretend that that is not what's going on. There's all these double layers with the idea that the government is watching and listening and trying to control what's going on. And so this relationship with the neighbor has to be a relationship in which they each pretend they're not doing anything for the benefit of the other while knowing that they are.
Yeah, there's like still that's like that quiet resistance of like the neighbors still being able to help in whatever the way they can, but like there's other lines in the play where it's clear that the neighbors can't be seen to be associating with them at all, where
Right,
like
like
they
they
try
won't
to.
accept food from them is a common
Yeah,
thing they talk about. They have all this extra fruit from their fruit trees, but the neighbors won't take any of it because it would reflect badly on them.
yeah, so you really get this kind of overwhelming, or not overwhelming, but this ever present, I guess, sense of the stakes of the neighbors and of them as they're trying to just have like community and like trying to figure out a way to exist in this kind of isolation, to the point that like there's so much isolation that they go through and that the audience goes through, that I found myself like questioning everything, like like questioning especially everything the lieutenant offers, is appropriately questioned frequently, but even to the point that like the radio is an important beat of the play. He offers to fix up the radio because the radio doesn't work anymore, and it's like one of the favors in exchange for more letters or whatever, and or more of the story. And so he takes it away. And I immediately was like, oh, he's taking it away to put a microphone in and he's going to catch him for everything. And I think it was ultimately just to isolate them further so that they had no shot of ever hearing anything on the radio. But there's just so much questioning and so much wondering around what the intent of everyone is all the time.
Yeah, and that questioning, it seems like even maybe you and I come down and slightly different. I'm not so sure that the lieutenant is like such an intentionally devious person the whole time. You know, obviously he's a figure for the violent, oppressive communist regime in Cuba, but I don't know that the play is really all that compelling to me if we don't believe that there is a chance somewhere in the middle that some of this stuff he's saying is earnest. He talks a fair bit in the middle about how his father left Cuba at one point because he was sort of fed up with the regime, and how he sort of wishes that he had gone with him. He expresses a fair amount of sympathy for her point of view, at one point even being sort of explicit, like, I'm with you. I believe in the stuff you say that I ought to believe in. I mean, he puts himself at a fair amount of political risk in terms of what he could be charged with, I suppose, or confronted with by the government. That really, of course, comes to a head when he sees Sophia sneak out of the house, and now like has that secret that it seems clear to me that he has decided not to share with his compatriots, and so I'm maybe a little more convinced by his earnestness, even while recognizing that like he has an incredible position of like authoritative, oppressive power that he does then bring down on them in the end when he's rejected.
Yeah, I think probably my subjective response to him definitely impacted my summary of him. So forgive me if that's needed to be corrected. But I do think I agree with you that I think the play functions best if you have that wondering the whole time. If you have that wondering of like, oh, maybe he is going to like, especially in that middle part of the play when he starts to talk about how he like really cares about the same stuff that she cares about and was against some of the stuff that she was against, and he's trying to figure out some way to help. I think you gotta believe for the play to function. You gotta believe that is at least partially true, and try to see if there's some way that he is going. Like the real stakes at the end is he going to help them? Continue either Sophia's desire to be outside or something along the lines, and not really the tragedy or the hardship is that he doesn't in the end.
Right. Like it to me, like the perspective of the play is Maria's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, whether she knows better or not, or really in her heart of hearts believes it or not, really wants to, at least for a period of time, believe in the well-meaningness, and, falls for this officer in some, fleeting romantic sexual way. And that it is, whether or not that's like true on his end, or whether he's got secret misintentions, or he's certainly abusing his power. I mean, regardless of anything else, that's definitely happening in the play. But I think regardless of any of that, the perspective of the play is hers. We follow sort of her belief for a time, and at one point he says that he's out trying to convince the higher ups to let them out of their house arrest. Now, maybe he's lying. I don't know. We don't really, I don't think, have access to like what he's really like or what is going on outside of the house. And in fact, at one point late in the play, she learns that he's arrested a young boy during a sort of riot out in the streets, and it sort of shocks her to remember that there is a version of him outside of the house. And that becomes to me like the major juxtaposition is not quite the word I want, but like the major sort of worlds of the play is the world inside the house, and there's some fairly specific things that world is like, and the what else is going on out there that we don't have access to.
Yeah, there's all sorts of wonderings around like how much of it is actually getting back. At one point, I think Sophia says, "Haven't you noticed that none of the people are returning here to do house checks on the house? It's just him now." So there is this kind of wondering about what sort of role he has outside. He says a lot of things, but it's hard to know what to believe. And I'm not fully gonna let him off the hook, because like from day one or moment one, like he's doing all the things that a manipulator does. Like he has this stack of letters, slowly he's going to read it off, and then slowly he's going to do these little self-inserts of his own desire for Maria Celia. And there's all sorts of little things that, at least in the reading of it, is so clear, but in the seeing of it and in the moment for the characters is obscured by this appealing nature that he has, and this at least his words that he's saying, "I'm trying to help in whatever way I can."
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is the definite case that the first scene of the play is him violently breaking in. He's calling them terrible names. They're searching their house kind of aggressively. And then the final scene in the play is presumably he has removed their piano and is pounding on the door for them again. So there's no escaping his link to the violent regime, his desire to have, as Sophia says, like ownership of them in this house, the sort of trapped nature of it. Like after Maria has slept with him and the sort of romance, what of it there is sort of burgeoning, Sophia challenges her sister. She says, this is the line you were talking about earlier. Can't you see what you're doing? Can't you see what you're getting yourself into with this man? He's not going to make it better for us. I've watched him. He got rid of all the inspectors who used to come to this house. He's the only one who comes here. Can't you see it spelled out on his forehead? Ownership. Everything about him screams zookeeper.
Yeah. Yep. There's that real kind of, and I think it does land later on in the play, and I think the characters do sort of see it in clarity. But I think I think that is all tied into him being the zookeeper, him being the one who holds the lock for them is also noted by Maria Celia to him later on in the play, where she says, let's see, "I'm afraid of what locked up places breed."
Yeah, I have that line marked too. First of all, wow. Great.
Yeah.
Line. Holy smokes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Incredible line. And all three of those in the series, just go to page 40. I'm not going to read them all here because it's a great scene, but go to page 48 in your scripts if you have the script and read through that scene real quick.
Right. And just to set the
scene.
context, the scene is essentially her saying we need to stop this because what we are inside this house is not what we really are. And one of the reviews described it as sort of her realizing the context for who they are in this relationship that's been sort of washed away by the strange isolationism of the house arrest.
Mm-hmm. And it has kind of continues with, "I've been closed up in this house for a long time, too long. Does something to your mind, a sort of blindness that makes you close your eyes and see somebody who's not there in front of you." And that, I think that line, that series of lines, this whole scene is talking about them in the house, is talking about the relationships that this play has established. It's also talking about the kind of broader, the broader conversation around isolationist nations as well. This kind of close your eyes and don't pay attention to what's on the outside world is not ultimately a healthy way to go. So there is this. I love that scene because it's talking about both, and you really hear the revolutionary in Maria Celia and hear her writerness kind of coming to bear as she talks about both about this relationship but also the greater conversation around the nation.
Yeah, I'm afraid of what locked up places breed.
Yeah.
It's just, it does not get much better than that, I
Good
gotta say.
line.
In terms of lines to write for a character to say out loud, it's hard to imagine much better than that.
Yes.
Interestingly, during an interview with the cast, I believe this was for the Two River Theater in New Jersey production, but if I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But there was an interview with the cast where they were interviewing each other in kind of a marketing sort of video thing. And the question posed to one of them, I believe it was for the actor playing Sophia, was like, what do you think the message of the play is? And the actor playing Sophia talked about romance, that everyone is enchanted by the romance of the house and the family history and these artist sisters, the musician and the writer. And like, I thought that was a really interesting answer, because the play obviously is very political. It's about a captor and a captive in terms of the outsiders and the insiders. It's about danger. It's about censorship. It's about all this stuff. The romance part of it is, like, to me, a pretty complicated part of it. And so for her to describe this idea that everyone being enchanted by the situation, right? And that to me became really interesting to take us back, if we can, Jackson, to the script notes. I want to read the description that Nilo Cruz provides of the house in a special note. It says, note to designers. So first of all, under place in the script notes, it says Cuba, a spacious colonial house. Okay, so we get that. It's a spacious colonial house. But that apparently wasn't enough for Nilo Cruz, who felt it was important enough to include this note, that he wrote a note to designers specifically, where he says, the set and lights should have a feeling of openness. They should not feel claustrophobic. I thought that was fascinating, because in some ways, this is a play about a prison, right?
Yeah.
Because these women are under house arrest. And like, if I were to write a play about, for example, like COVID isolation, being under, quote unquote, fake house arrest during COVID, like I might want to write about the space around me feeling claustrophobic, feeling smaller than it really is. But Nilo Cruz says, no. This is a prison. They're locked up in this house. But, and I'm using my own words, it's not what he literally wrote. He sort of says, it's a prison that doesn't feel like a prison.
Mm-hmm.
It is a prison, but boy, it also looks like they're in a gorgeous, tropical, colonial, enormous, spacious house with a baby grand piano in the living room. And that contrast to me, the fact that they are locked up, but it's not quite like being in prison. There is a romance, as that actor from the Two River Theater production said, to the environment. There's a beauty, and they have a gorgeous patio where they have fruit trees growing, apparently, in enough abundance that they have extra fruit that they're trying to hand out. There is the environment doesn't quite match the true power dynamics of the situation. And I wonder how that plays into what happens.
Yeah, there's this sort of like reversal, or like what's beneath the mirage, perhaps, and pretty quickly, I think somewhat quickly we discover what's there, and we discover that they're trapped in this place, and the slow realization that in this sort of beautiful facade there is something rotten underneath. And the kind of slow journey to figure out what exactly that is, as a result of the play is really interesting one to go on, especially set within the sort of not austere is the wrong word, but the beauty of this setting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you look up production photos, the house that is created, really across productions, does feel like lovely. There's like a lovely, enchanting quality to it. And that might be like part of the hypnoticism, I'm not saying that word right, but the sort of hypnosis that takes place, right? That Maria sort of has to wake up to later in the play. This locked up place that we're in has like changed my psychology in a way that has caused me to do things that are out of context with the situation. I don't, and that might be true for the lieutenant too. I don't think we ought to let him off the hook, given that he's the one with the power in this situation. So I don't, I don't excuse his behavior necessarily, but I do think that in order for the play to work, like he also has to be under the spell a little bit in some way. Later in the play, after she's like basically said we have to stop, one of the things he says is, before I met you, before I was the person, the jail keeper for this house, essentially, I was a clean revolutionary. I never had any trouble. I didn't have anything on my record. But apparently after reading her books and spending this time with her, he's willing to say things like, I believe what you believe. I'm trying to get you out of here. So whatever happens inside this gorgeous prison, it's something different. Like, I wonder, would this play have happened if they were just in jail cells? I think the answer might be no.
Yeah. I think I definitely agree with you. I think that the setting for this, again, it puts me on edge because it makes me kind of wonder, like, like what is the kind of narrative that's being spun by this place in order to get what result, or what is the perceived gift that is being given and what is being expected of the return for that gift. And it sort of, at least for me, it continued to raise the nervousness, and the nervousness like pervades, comes across in so many characters, like Victor Manuel. I want to come back to your comments at the beginning, but like him coming into the space, he's initially untrusted. He has to like tell Sophia he's not wearing a wire. He shows his permit multiple times, tries to establish that he's a trustworthy enough person to kind of be in the house as he's tuning the piano. But he has a pretty significant impact on Sophia's story, and I've seen some productions kind of bring him back in the end to take the piano away, which is a really interesting beat for him to return without any lines in that particular scene. But I wanted to check in, like, what kind of your interest in his character as you kind of talked about him a little bit in the context.
Yeah, well, we only get that one scene with him, right? He comes into the piano and something clearly happens between him and Sophia that is part of the enchantment, as that actor in the Two River Theater production put it, of the space and the sort of historic Cuban family and these artist sisters, right? There's not the political power context, but the aesthetic context almost. Sophia, a lot of the reviews describe Sophia, again, I haven't seen it, so I'm just going on to text and reviews, that she like pretty well falls for this piano tuner. She kisses him as he leaves. Now, I'm not totally sure that it's like a romantic lover's kiss. There's a different context there for kissing that I don't know that is, it's hard to read other than because the stage direction just says she kisses him. But she wants him to come back. She dresses up when they invite him back for dinner. Clearly there's interest there, and some reviews say the actor is playing it as a fairly head over heels interest in this piano tuner character who comes in at first with this idea that every piano should be logged by the communist government and ensured that it's being used, as much as it can, and not just for bourgeoisie decoration. And by the end has sort of agreed to tune the piano and fix it up as best he can for her, seems also to be interested back in her. It's a very short little interaction, and it's certainly part of this larger thing that happens in this house where when outsiders come in, their relationship to what's going on inside the house is different because of the isolation of these two sisters. But Victor just feels like a fascinating character, and what might or might not happen between him and Sophia and why he doesn't come back are all questions that I'm just curious and interested by.
Me too. Yeah, I'd be very interested in kind of reading a little bit more from his perspective. Because again, as we previously established, I read this play very paranoid. But like my my perspective or my perception was wondering, like, the lieutenant saw him there that day, and the lieutenant shows up at the time that Victor is supposed to be there for dinner, and I'm like, did he just like disappear Victor so that there isn't someone else connected to this house? So there's all sorts of wonderings from that character that I would like to kind of find out more about too.
Yeah, I think there's a great mystery about what happened to him. Did he decide not to come back, and why? Or, I think you're wondering is pretty relevant. Did the lieutenant disappear him because he was somebody who clearly had some influence and power in that house, that the lieutenant did not want anybody but him to have influence and power in that house. I mean, I think it's so this play is like so, there's so many layers to it because, as we've said, because of the like who's listening and what can you say and not say. Like, to me, the whole thing with the neighbor and the music really speaks to like, nobody can say they have a political or even a human empathy for the plight of the sisters because they're political enemies, because they've written this manifesto. But if we take what the sisters describe as happening as being what's literally happening, then it seems like this neighbor has some at least human empathy for them and is playing this music to provide some comfort and connection, even while he can't do anything like take fruit from them for fear of being like politically tarred. And so there is this like level of what's happening, what you're able to show and say about human connection. That's one thing. What you have to be in public or even in private for fear of somebody's watching in terms of how you present your political, your human worldview. And then there's this strange sort of twisting that happens inside of the house of those two things together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another tier of all that kind of coming in and twisting together, and then there's another tier of like, who is the truest witness to you in the midst of that. And I think that's where like Sophia and Maria Celia's relationship is the one that shines, is the most honest conversations that happen, the ones that you believe the most, the ones that feel the most real, are the ones that are with the people that you're are so intertwined with. And I think
I think that's really important because I think it is Sophia that wakes Maria up to the strangeness of her relationship with the lieutenant and the real context for that relationship beyond the enchantment, what it feels like within the enchantment of the house. I mean, if we take that story about where Nilo Cruz got this play, that was about one person. Now maybe there was a sister there, and I just don't know the whole story. But as I've read it, that's about one person under house arrest. So as Nilo Cruz is writing this play, why add a sister? Why add a character who's in the context with you? Well, I think it's because they can see clearly for each other.
Yeah.
In a way that it's hard to see clearly for yourself.
Yeah, to the point that Maria Celia asks Sophia to witness her frequently. Like
yes.
She says,
that's a great point. Yeah.
I want you in the room, and some of that is just the safety aspect.
Of course.
I want you in the room when the lieutenant's here, but also I want you to hear what I say and hear what he says and hear what the letters he's writing or he's reading say, because that witnessing is important. And I think so that aspect of who is witnessing you in amidst all of this is a really impactful thing and a really important question of the play, especially for folks who are undergoing levels of oppression. That's a really important question to ask. Who is it that is still at the core that is witnessing you amidst this press and amidst this kind of cloud and the facades that are all around? Who is still there at the core of it, able to share the story with you?
Yes, I agree. I think that's a great way to put it and a great way to end our conversation. There's a lot more to talk about. I love the title. I didn't rhapsodize about the title this time, but I think it's a great title. Well done, Nilo Cruz. If you enjoyed this conversation, we do encourage you to come check us out again. We've got a great season in front of us still, even though we're several episodes in by now. Great privilege to do the show. Always love to have these conversations.
Yes, indeed. Thank you all for tuning into this episode. Though we are at the end of this particular conversation, we'd love to extend it out to all of you. If you've read this play, seen this play, maybe during COVID on one of the broadcasts or in any of the other productions that have recently been produced, we'd love to be chatting about this play with you as well. You can find us on the social medias. We're no longer being specific about which ones. The social medias at No Script Podcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about Two Sisters and the piano with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please recommend us to your family and friends. Anybody you know that likes conversations about theater, about themes, stories, characters, writers, that kind of stuff, send them our way. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're on Podbean, we're on YouTube, the places you get your podcasts. You can also like our Facebook page, and a link to the new episode appears every Monday when we publish, including next Monday when we're back with another conversation about another great script. Until then, I'm Jacob, here with Jackson. Thanks for joining us for No Script, the podcast.